because any moment the U.S. Senate will put on a congressional record a rare rejection of President Trump, and it is the second time in 2 days. Plus, today's rebuke has an even deeper sting since it is over Donald Trump's marquee campaign promise, building that border wall. Senators are on the verge of approving a resolution to block the president's national emergency declaration. The declaration is supposed to unlock $3.6 billion from the Defense Department to go toward the wall. Just a short while ago, the president said this about today's vote.
I'll probably have to veto, and it's not going to be overturned, and we're going to have our whole thing. It's been, the legal scholars all say it's totally constitutional. It's very important. It's really a border security vote. It's pure and simple. It's a vote for border security. It's a vote for no crime.
However, many members of Trump's own party say that this vote is actually about a president overreaching his powers, which is why the list of Republicans voting to approve this block is growing. So straight to Capitol Hill we go, and our CNN senior congressional correspondent Manu Raju with so far this sort of vote tally. And I know that the fear from at least the White House, Manu, is that as many as 14 Republican senators could say yes to blocking the president's national emergency. What are the numbers you have right now?
Well, right now, 10 Republicans have announced that they plan to vote against the president, voting for that disapproval resolution in a matter of minutes. 47 Democrats are going to vote for the resolution. That means 57 at the moment, at least, will rebuke the president enough to send it to his desk. That at the moment is still short of the 67 needed to overturn a veto. We expect more Republicans potentially to vote for this measure. But behind the scenes, the president and the vice president have been trying to limit those defections on the Republican side. They've had some success. One Senator, Johnny Isakson of Georgia, told me he spoke with the president this week, and the president made it very clear he wanted his this emergency declaration to go forward. Isakson said he would stand with the president. Others made their positions known to the president as well, including Mitt Romney, the Utah senator, who told the president last week that he plans to vote against him, support this resolution, and he said he's doing so because he needs to uphold the Constitution. And he said the president urged him to change his mind.
I informed the president last week that I would be voting in favor of the resolution of disapproval.
What did he say?
Well, he'd rather have me vote in a different direction, but I let him know that this, for me, is a matter of defending the Constitution.
The president's been lobbying pretty hard on this. Are you worried about backlash from the president for your support for this resolution?
I think the president recognizes that senators will vote their conscience. Will vote based upon their assessment of what's at stake and the principles involved. And different senators see it different ways. That's the nature of a pluralistic Senate. But the president can certainly express his views, as he has, and individual senators will express theirs.
And 3 Republican senators last night, Brooke, tried to essentially stage an intervention at the White House last night. Senator Lindsey Graham, along with Ben Sasse and Mike Lee, all went to the White House, and what Graham said was barging into the White House, interrupting Trump's dinner to discuss with him a possible deal to avoid more defections, urged the president to back a separate proposal to limit the use of national emergencies in the future. The president would not go along with that, but the pitch to him was support that. Perhaps you can limit Republican defections. The president would not go along with that. So at the moment, the behind-the-scenes effort by the president having not much success in preventing this vote, certainly from passing today. The only question now is how many Republican senators will ultimately defect. At least 10 right now. Brooke.
We will chat again during the vote upcoming. Manu, thank you. While some Republicans and all Democrats see this vote as really a way to stop a power grab, sources say the president sees this as a loyalty test. Again, we are minutes from this vote, and while we wait, let's talk to CNN chief political analyst Gloria Borger and CNN political commentator Charlie Dent, a former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania. So, Gloria, to you first. Trump sees this as a loyalty test. How big of an embarrassment might this be to the president?
Pretty big embarrassment. I mean, this is the second time he's going to lose something in the Senate. The first time came when Republicans voted to pull back American aid to Saudi forces in Yemen. And then this. And again, as you point out, this is something the president campaigned on. It was his #1 issue. He's trying to make it a loyalty test and say this is about border security. Republicans are should be united with me on border security. And they're saying, no, there's something a little bit more important here, and that's the Constitution. Even though the president sort of hinted maybe, okay, you vote for this, and then maybe later I'll support you on saying you can't, I'll never do it again, or no president can ever do it again, and that's a little hokey. So it is a big embarrassment.
When you look, though, Congressman Dent, at some of these names, like you would expect the Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski's and Ben Sasses of the world, right? But when I look at this list, Senator Mike Lee, Tom Tillis, Rand Paul, Rob Portman just got added as number 10 to vote yes. You wouldn't expect these names. So is there a certain senator who is surprising you the most, and who else are you really going to be watching for?
Well, Brooke, I'm not surprised by any of the names you mentioned. I'm really, frankly, shocked that there are not more members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, House and Senate, who aren't voting for this resolution.
Really?
There is an emergency, and the emergency is the presidential assault on Congress's power of the purse authority under Article 1 of the Constitution. That is the emergency, as far as I can tell. The loyalty here is to the Constitution, not to the president. The president is taking defense dollars, military construction dollars, and moving them for a non-defense purpose. That breaks the law. There are all sorts of problems with this thing. I wrote the military construction bill before I left Congress, so I know a little bit about this. And if you're a senator and you're going to vote against this resolution, understand that your state has many projects that the president could siphon money from, and you're going to be exposed on that issue.
Why do you think they're not doing that? What are they afraid of?
Well, I think that the president gets the base ginned up, and many members, Republican members, unfortunately, are looking over their right shoulder. They're worried about a primary or maybe a presidential tweet and getting crosswise with the president. But for me, this is a simple issue of separation of powers, of Congress protecting its power of the purse authority. It's plain and simple. It's slam dunk.
And Gloria, back to Manu's reporting about essentially you have these three senators, these are typical allies of the president, Graham, Sass, Cruz, and they essentially barge into this White House dinner and are essentially saying, to the president, listen, I'll do this, I'll vote in your favor, but promise me you will never do this again. Yeah. Where does Trump stand on this?
Well, he's sort of like, okay, he tweeted, at a later date, if Congress wants to update the law, I will support those efforts. But what is that worth? And as Charlie Dent is saying, these members of Congress, these conservatives and Democrats who are joining, are saying to themselves, what are we doing here? If we allow this president to have this authority, and we're supposed to be the ones with the power of the purse, and then he can start moving around all the chips on the table when he wants to, you have to ask yourself whether you've essentially neutered yourself and your responsibilities as a member of Congress, not only to your constituents, but as Charlie Dent is also saying, to the Constitution.
Yeah.
And every member of Congress has to ask himself and say, who am I and what am I doing here? To repeat a phrase.
Well, why would they, Charlie Dent, Congressman, why would they give him this one-time pass? Why even allow to do this once?
I really think it all has to do with primary pressures. Getting members of the Congress are worried about, Republican members are worried about getting crosswise with their base. It's really that simple. I mean, because there really is no other reason for this. By the way, if you're going to declare an emergency, a national emergency, then the remedy, in this case a wall, should address the underlying emergency. And I can make a very powerful case that building a barrier is not going to stop poor migrants from Central America entering a port of entry and surrendering. It really isn't going to do any good, and you can't build the wall fast enough for a whole host of reasons. So there are all sorts of problems with this thing, from the Article 1 issue, the fact that the remedy isn't going to address the underlying emergency.
We are minutes away from the vote. We'll talk about it when it happens live. In the meantime, Congressman and Gloria, thank you very, very much for that. Meantime, Beto O'Rourke makes it official, launching his 2020 campaign with a swing through Iowa and a front cover of Vanity Fair. He says he was just born to do this, but what does he stand for? And 33 parents facing charges in that massive college cheating scandal. But what about the students involved? Will they be expelled? What the schools are saying about that now. And he is one of Robert Mueller's top prosecutors. He has been referred to as the LeBron James of money laundering investigations. What his departure says about the Mueller investigation overall. You're watching CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin. Coming in on live pictures, Beto O'Rourke standing up on a counter in a restaurant there in Burlington, Iowa. The big story today, after months of hints, public events, and self-described soul-searching, the former Texas congressman has finally made his decision. He is running for president in 2020, and he is already campaigning in the first state to hold a presidential nominating vote, Iowa.
Keokuk is the first stop in our campaign to be president of the United States of America. This setting right now, the very first event of our campaign for president, is an example not only of the way that I wish to campaign across this country for every single American, and I could care less your party persuasion, your religion, anything other than the fact that right now we are all Americans and we are all human beings, and we do everything within our power for one another, for this great country, and for every generation that follows. This is democracy.
His announcement also coincides with an extensive profile in Vanity Fair and a very all-American photo shoot by Anna Leibovitz, in which he says he is, quote, born to do this. So with me now, Vic Collins. He's a business reporter for the El Paso Times, and he just interviewed O'Rourke about joining this already very crowded Democratic field. So, Vic, thank you so much for being with me. And I got to start with this Vanity Fair Annie Leibovitz, bit, because this is a guy, it seems to me, paints himself as a, I was once on the El Paso City Council, and I ride my bike to political events, and I like to Instagram my family. I'm just like you. So why Vanity Fair?
Well, I understand Ann Leibovitz has a connection to El Paso. I think her father was stationed here in the military, so she was here for a little time. That could be the reason that happened.
Do you think it's fitting with his personality?
I'm sorry?
Do you think it's fitting with his personality?
The Vanity Fair piece?
Yes.
Yeah, it did. I saw part of it. I read part of it. It portrayed his personality pretty well, and he's just like when he was a congressman, you just run across him on the street just by himself. I mean, nobody with him, easy to talk to. So that part of him that's a correct persona.
So as we all know, this whole Democratic field, everyone who's jumped in, it's really been shifting left. And from what I've read in local Texas politics, O'Rourke has had success with a large number of Republicans, white Republicans. And a former editor for your paper was actually quoted in Vanity Fair saying that O'Rourke does indeed have a Republican connection. But the article also points out that he can come off as, quote, politically indistinct and slippery. So do you think, Vic, that that's part of O'Rourke's strategy, perhaps to not define himself as a progressive, to appeal to a more moderate Democratic audience?
Well, he doesn't like to label himself in any way. When he was on city council here, he was, you would call him a progressive. They did a lot of things. They got they gave tax incentives to a big complex here that's now like a big housing retail complex. They had some part in trying to get started a baseball stadium in downtown El Paso, and so he did have that progressive label here on the city council.
So would you label him a progressive, even though he won't label himself as one?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say he's a progressive, leaning like moderate, maybe, but I mean, yeah, he portrays himself, of course, saying that he isn't running against anybody. He's just running for the country, he did a lot of that in his Texas campaign, that he's just this guy that wants to bring the country together. And, that's what he said when Trump came to El Paso. He held a big rally, drew, several thousands of people. That was just like right across the parking lot from where Trump was speaking to a big crowd also.
Has made his mark for years, and now he's on the main stage, so to speak, now throwing his hat in to be the next president of the United States. Vic Collins, thank you for weighing in there from his hometown of El Paso. Meantime, let me remind all of you, CNN's next presidential haul is with 2020 candidate Senator Elizabeth Warren. Jake Tapper is hosting that. That is live from Jackson, Mississippi, Monday night, 9 o'clock Eastern here on CNN. We are getting fresh reaction from the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee today over emails that detail this back channel between Michael Cohen and Rudy Giuliani, something first reported right here on CNN. An attorney who said he was speaking with Giuliani reassured Cohen in an April 2018 email that Cohen could, quote unquote, sleep well tonight because he had, quote, friends in high places.
I'm wondering if you take that as a dangling of a pardon, if you have any concerns about that.
We have seen the president dangle pardons publicly, really through much of the course of the investigation. It doesn't require any great imagination to picture the president also having conversations privately as he's having quite publicly. We obviously are deeply interested in all the documents that Mr. Cohen produced and others that we've been able to obtain. We'll be looking to corroborate the evidence we've received, and this is very much a deep interest of ours.
Robert Bianchi is a former head prosecutor from Morris County, New Jersey, and a host for the Law and Crime Network. Bob,
Brooke.
Obviously, Chairman Schiff is interested in looking into this. Do you see this as some form of pardon dangling?
I don't know yet. I don't think we have all the facts, but it really comes down to what's being said. There's nothing wrong with attorneys or people approaching the president who has the absolute authority of a pardon and say, we'd like you to consider this. The question becomes whether or not it was, if you play ball with us and don't cooperate, then we're inclined to give you a pardon. But here's the thing. He did cooperate because I think Cohen...
He being Michael Cohen.
Michael Cohen.
Yeah.
Cohen saw something that we've been saying, some lawyers for a long time, and him being a lawyer knows. You can pardon Cohen for the federal crimes, but you can't pardon for the state level crimes. So I think, unlike Manafort, Cohen's legal team saw it smarter by not seeking the pardon. I think that's why, look, if I can get it, I can get it. But in the end analysis, as a defense lawyer, I'd have to say to him, hey, bro, you get that federal pardon, you are going to be with the state AG and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in a hot flash, and the president can do nothing for you.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll see where it falls with regard to Chairman Schiff. I wanted to ask you about Prosecutor Andrew Weissman. He's a key member of Mueller's entire team. He was actually at Roger Stone's court appearance today. He's expected to leave the office in the DOJ soon. When he was hired, this is what Steve Bannon actually referred to him to Michael Wolff as, quote, the LeBron James of money laundering investigations. So I know. So his departure, what does that signal for you as far as this whole Mueller investigation?
Having led an agency of people who are very dedicated investigative personnel that are involved in a very large investigation, like a wiretap investigation, something like this.
Yeah.
They want to stay on forever to see it to its conclusion. Now, absent a personal reason or a personal calamity in his family, I don't think he just decided that, hey, look, it's time. I've been around. Let me just get going. I think they want to see this to the conclusion. So it leads me to believe
that they are concluding.
They are concluding, and his efforts aren't necessarily as dramatic because it's going to move into a different phase.
Yep. Okay. You like that? LeBron James of money laundering investigations?
It's pretty impressive.
Bob Bianchi, thank you very much. Good to see you. Again, just a reminder, any moment now, the Senate is set to rebuke President Trump over his emergency declaration. And we're just now learning one Republican who was going to vote against the president just changed his mind. Hear why.
On CNN.
All right, we are back with the breaking news here. Live pictures of the U.S. Senate floor. This vote is now officially underway. The Senate is set to rebuke President Trump over his emergency declaration. But we have just learned about one Republican who was set to vote against this president, but just changed his mind. So let's go back to our senior congressional correspondent there, Mani Raju. Tell me what Senator Tillis has said.
Yeah, Tom Tillis made quite a splash just a few days ago when he wrote a Washington Post op-ed saying very clearly he was going to oppose the president on the emergency declaration, saying that he was going to support for this resolution that is now on the Senate floor to disapprove of the president's move, saying very clearly that he runs counter to the Constitution in that Washington Post op-ed. Well, over the last several days, he's been engaged in conversations with the White House, with the president, with the vice president about changes to the national emergency law that the president is citing as part of this effort to move forward. And he said because of those discussions that he's had, he's changed his mind.
So today, I come to the floor to say that I do not intend to vote for the resolution of disapproval. And here's why. A lot has changed over the last 3 weeks. A discussion with the Vice President, a number of senior administration officials, a lot of collaboration with my colleague from Utah. That's a serious discussion about changing the National Emergencies Act in a way that will have Congress speak on emergency actions in the future. The White House has been very gracious, and I should say very patient, given my initial position, in working with us, and as late as today, having the President make a statement that he's willing to work with us. I suspect that we'll hear more from the President, but we also heard today.
And that's much different than what he said in that Washington Post op-ed when he said, I cannot justify providing the executive with more ways to bypass Congress. He said, as a conservative, I cannot endorse a precedent that I know future left-wing presidents will exploit to advance radical policies that will erode economic and individual freedoms. Tillis, of course, is up for re-election in 2020 in North Carolina, a state in which he needs the president's supporters to really get behind him. We'll see how much that ultimately played in, but he believes there's those discussions. He says those discussions that he had with the White House that reassured him about why urging him to change his vote. Now, one other senator just announced his vote, an interesting vote, Roy Blunt, who's a member of the Republican leadership. He's on the Senate Appropriations Committee. He just said he would buck the president, vote for this disapproval resolution. So that means right now, Brooke, we are standing at the moment 10 Republican senators still who plan to vote against the president, joining the 47 Democrats. So at the moment, 57 senators will vote to send this to the president's desk. There is enough support, of course, to send this to Trump's desk, force the first veto of his presidency on an issue so central to his campaign and to his first term here in office. But at the moment, it appears unlikely to get the 67 needed to overcome a veto from this president. Nevertheless, a significant rebuke from the president he's facing on the Senate floor momentarily, but at least one Republican senator they got to change his mind. Brooke.
Manu Raju watching all of the chess pieces moving about on the board there on the U.S. Senate floor. Stay with us. We'll see which Republicans surprise everyone and monitor that vote. Meantime, why did it take the U.S. so long to ground those Boeing jets involved in 2 deadly crashes? The president says Boeing has to figure it out fast. A class action lawsuit has now been filed in the wake of the biggest college admissions scam ever prosecuted in the United States. And outraged plaintiffs want the 8 schools involved and the scheme's mastermind to pay up. They allege those schools were negligent and denied students a fair process. And at least one claims her Stanford degree isn't worth as much because future employers may think she didn't get into her university the good old-fashioned way with hard work. Claire Wang is the editor-in-chief of the Stanford Daily. So, Claire, thank you so much for being with me. And, I mean, to be clear, you're not part of this lawsuit, but you do graduate next year. And do you think this scandal cast doubt on your Stanford degree?
I mean, thank you so much for having me, first of all. And also, I think, generally the sentiment around campus is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of disappointment, especially for all those students who worked very hard to get in and made a lot of sacrifices in high school and in now to get into Stanford and to make the most of their degree. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty about what this means for the future, for our futures and, after we graduate, and also, for the admissions process now. So I definitely agree with that sentiment that there is a fair amount of, not being sure about what this means for our futures, which I think is very normal.
It is normal, and I feel for you and so many others who I am sure got in, by hard work. I mean, my goodness, it's Stanford, and the piece of the story that's also coming out is that the sailing coach has been fired for his involvement in this whole scandal. School officials say it doesn't have any evidence that other employees were part of this, but you describe the mood on campus as students being disappointed, but you personally. Just take your journalist hat off for me for just 1 minute, just as a hardworking Stanford student. How do you feel?
I mean, personally, I definitely think that the accountability in, the athletic recruitment process, in the college admissions process, should be up for greater scrutiny. Given the current proceedings, the university does say that they're going to conduct their own internal review process. We're not sure what that looks like. They also say that they're redirecting the money that the sailing coach received in funneled into the sailing program so that it won't benefit Stanford's in any way. So not sure what that looks like either.
What about the students, though? Because none of the students working with Stanford's coach actually ended up attending. But what do you think should happen to the students who did benefit on other elite college campuses? Do you think that they should be expelled? Because in some cases, they had no idea what their parents had done.
Right. No, and exactly. It's very unclear, what sort of disciplinary action should be taken because so many of the students did not know, right, that their parents had taken this. And so it's, it's not up to me as a student to decide, what sort of action should be taken going forward, but definitely broader scrutiny.
What do you think is fair?
I definitely think it's, that the institutions should be subject to greater scrutiny. At least, college athletics recruiting should have, a stronger fact-finding, fact-checking process to sort of check people's credentials and then to sort of analyze college consulting services should definitely be subject to more scrutiny. And just, the college admissions process in general, I think greater accountability mechanisms need to be in place to ensure that spots are allocated to students who, earned them with integrity.
Integrity being the key word. Claire Wang, a lot of strong points. Thank you so much. Good luck there in your final year. And on this story, we're getting new details on how extensive this scam was, and on William Singer, the man behind it. Doug Belkin is a higher education reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and Doug, good to have you on. We know that Singer pleaded guilty to 4 charges earlier this week, admitting that he created this quote-unquote side door. It's how he referred to it, to help these wealthier clients get their kids into these top-tier schools. Just take me back to square one, and how did this all get started?
He moved to Sacramento in the late 80s. He was a basketball coach, a high school basketball coach. He parlayed that into an assistant coaching job at a Sacramento State. And then he opened up a shop helping local kids get counseling to get into college. The local high school there had one guidance counselor for 2,200 students, so there was a need, and he filled it. And he grew his business very slowly and steadily, and began to raise his rates, and ultimately moved to Newport, where it seems like he took this to a whole other level.
And then when he took it to a whole new level, how would he make his move, so to speak, with some of these parents on this side door option?
So what we know is that he offered a guarantee, and there's no college counselor who's legitimate who can guarantee a student that they're going to get an admission to any school, because it's not their decision to make. They can prepare the student as best they can, put their best foot forward, but they can't guarantee anything. That was what differentiated him from his competitors, and that's what drew these parents to him.
50 people, parents, coaches among them, have been implicated in this whole thing. But do you think Singer had help outside of that, perhaps at his businesses? Do you think more charges could be forthcoming?
Oh, I think that this is the beginning of a pretty broad net that's going to pull in a lot more folks at schools. The number of folks who were part of getting these kids tested and then cheating on the tests seems extensive, and this seems likely to continue to grow.
The whole thing, okay, so it will continue to grow, and we'll watch for that fallout. But this guy's plan was so comprehensive. The bribes, the lying about students' ethnicities, to utilize certain affirmative action programs, to doctoring photos of prospective, I air quote, athletes here. Of everything, of all of your reporting, what is the craziest thing you've learned about this whole story?
So what's the most interesting to me about this is that he's taken a system that is essentially tilted, and he took it to the most logical level, the next level. Kids who are coming to these college counselors have so many advantages applying to school. There's a line that they can't cross. You can't lie. He did that all over the place. These fake IDs becoming athletes that they didn't even participate in the sport. To me, it's sort of stunning that was able to get by and eventually convince these committees that these kids were, elite athletes.
When they had never